a film contains our struggles in images that have a start line, a continuity of narrative, and then an ending that always seems to be somewhat celebratory. You know, there's a celebration, and so there's closure. And that's different from political terror, which is part of Black existence, at least in the US.
And on the topic of closure or lack thereof, Stan, I'm wondering if you could talk a little bit more about the counterintelligence program, COINTELPRO, and whether or not you see remnants of its existence now and how it functions in Black life in general, in the movement, in suppression of radical movements today.
Yeah, that's a tall order. The counterintelligence program targeted the Black community in particular in the late 60s, but it wasn't new. It had targeted others. It had targeted the Communist Party, although they had a special section on the Communist Party that they targeted, in particular the Negro section. But the targeting of the Black community in particular was probably late 60s. In fact, when most of this film was shown, or the action of the film in the 70s, COINTELPRO was in full steam. It had several Panther Party members had been murdered by then, by 72. Of course, Fred Hampton was murdered in 69. Many others were murdered in 69 and 70. I think the thing to remember, it was a high-level government program. It wasn't just J. Edgar Hoover. Many government officials knew about it, including the president. And I think the other context of it, and this is expanding the question a little bit if I can, that the film doesn't show, is that the movement then, that Angela was involved in and many others, was a very broad movement that was connected in many ways to international struggle of people around the world. The movement involving Angela and others at that time, we were very cognizant and were working in some ways in conjunction with movements on the continent of Africa. We were following the movements as they evolved, and there was some relationship in that evolution of the movements around the liberation struggles in Africa. We were very supportive of those. We followed them closely. We were very supportive of the Cuban Revolution. And so the youth, I would say, and the Black youth in the United States at that time in the 60s were very much aware of and very much acting in concert with movements in other parts of the world. And those movements were watching what was going on in the States as well. When you think about it, if you just look at the 60s, for example, just making a comparison historically, we know in the 60s, the civil rights movement, as we know of it, the modern civil rights movement had gotten off the ground in Montgomery. But in the 60s in South Carolina, students began to organize separate from the established civil rights movement. And SNCC was organized in the 60s. But also in the 60s, things were going on the continent. For example, the Sharpsville massacre occurred in the 60s. And so as we were moving, they were moving too. The Cuban Revolution, for example, occurred in the 59 and 60s. And so those movements were moving, not in conjunction, but they were a movement that people were aware of and were emulating and supporting. And so that, in some ways, that radicalized Black revolutionaries in this country. And I think partly that explains why the government felt it necessary to neutralize through COINTELPRO the Black liberation movement with the hopes that it would not advance here as it had advanced in parts of Africa. because by the middle of the 60s, going into the 70s, the liberation movements had, in particular those in the Portuguese colonies, former colonies, had gone into armed struggle. And so we were very supportive of those movements. And I think there was a fear that we may go into armed struggles at some point in the States. And so the government clamped down very hard, even though the movements in the States were generally under the First Amendment. They were peaceful movements, but they were organized movements, and they had become international in their concept. And so COINTELPRO was a government program to neutralize and destroy the black movements. Black Panther Party was the main target, but the civil rights movements took a hit too. Dr. King's leadership, and many others that were involved in the civil rights movement came under scrutiny as well, just as they had done in the 50s under the McCarthy period. So I think that broader concept is very important in kind of help understanding what was happening with Angela during this time period in terms of the total movement.
And current government repression?
I think current government repression is, to say the least, is more sophisticated. For example, here in Chicago, the government is still using the grand jury subpoenas to disrupt organizations. We have been defending and fighting off the government here in Chicago because they've gone after solidarity people, particularly those in solidarity with the Palestinian movement, anti-war people. And so what I mean by the subpoena used as a weapon, they will subpoena you to go before the grand jury if you're in the organization. And what they want to find out, not that you committed a crime, they want to find out about the organization, because they want to find ways to dismantle the organization. So if it's a solidarity organization, you're in solidarity with the Palestinian people, they subpoena you to go before the grand jury. And of course, you don't go. So what happens if you don't go? Well, then they say, well, we'll give you immunity because you usually invoke the Fifth Amendment. I'm not going, I have a right not to go. They said, well, we'll give you immunity so you don't have to invoke the Fifth Amendment. And then if you don't go, they ask the judge to put you in jail. And they will put you in jail. And so you have to stay in jail during the term of the grand jury, which now could be up to 18 months. And then once you get out of jail, they could give you another subpoena and send you back to jail. So the end result of that is to scare the hell out of people and to put a damper on and a chilling effect on organizing around unpopular issues. So that's going on. And we know in the real sense, and you all won't like this, I'm going to say it anyway because I'm not going to lie to you, the Obama administration's policy is an extension of the Bush policies, and it has gotten worse. We're seeing the notion of using drones all over the world, and now they're talking about using drones in the United States. We're seeing this kind of permanent detention of U.S. citizens without due process under the Obama administration. So we're seeing this, and it's more sophisticated because Americans have been dumbed down, and we're now raising hell about it. And so the things that were illegal under COINTELPRO, and this is the tragedy of it, in the kind of irony of it, have become legal now. They became legal after 9/11 with the laws that were enacted, and now they've become legal under Bush and under President Obama. So the things that they couldn't get away with then, that end up before the church committee, are accepted now. And so, yeah, it's much worse. I saw somebody, I think maybe Tucson or somebody send it to me, how a demonstration in this community taped a Chicago police in the middle of the demonstration with a sign.
University of Chicago.
University of Chicago, yeah.
Police.
Oh, it was University of Chicago police.
Yeah.
Well, it's still police. And they shouldn't have been there. And so during the COINTELPRO, they did that routinely. They would infiltrate organizations, You know, they had called snitch jackets, so they didn't, if you were a prominent leader and a legitimate leader, they would say you were an agent, and so people would be alienated from you. So they had all these tactics to destroy organizations, and they have those now, but they're not illegal. So we're in bad shape. Yeah. And what that means, I think, is that there are lessons to be learned from that time period. And we should study that time period so we won't make the mistakes of that time period, because we must protect the struggles that we develop now, because we have a much worse enemy.
Can I add something?
Yeah, I mean, thanks for that. I think, you know, part of the problem is also our achievement, right? I mean, when you want the first black president, you get one, but not necessarily do you get the political integrity and strategies for a greater democracy. So even in this speech, I think it was inauguration, I mean, the alliteration from, what was it, Seneca, Selma, Stonewall. Mm-hmm. So women's rights, civil rights, and the rights of gay, lesbian, bi, transgender. Mm-hmm. And so, you know, we're swept by rhetoric, right? That as long as our names get called out and we're on the roster, then we think we know we're included in democracy. And I think that allows us, as you say, to, you know, for people who are not active on a daily basis and most vulnerable, to kind of turn away from the increasing, as you said, sophistication, but also just this punitive vindictiveness about using the courts to any challenge against authority. And this could be the basis of a new coalition if you think of what is happening now with the FBI and Anonymous, right? So Anonymous hacked into the sentencing guidelines and started doing his Star Wars presentation on it. But that was in response to, and we'll see how this gets resolved, apparently it's legal to assassinate US citizens, like you assassinate everybody else. But there's no outrage, you know, nobody hit the streets in any major way about that, right? Because we got Seneca, Selma, and Stonewall. We got, you know, our names on the roster. And even someone like Aaron Swartz, who, you know, is white and he's at Harvard and he uploads, you know, info from JSTOR, which is academics and students, you know, whatever, we use it all the time. But he commits suicide because the courts are used against him. Or the Carl Dixon people in New York City around stop and frisk, that they're gonna get arrested and harassed and threatened, you know, with prison time just for photographing NYPD, intimidating black people like, you know, it's 19th century with the pass law. Do you deserve to be on the street? So any assertion of a humanity seems to be problematic if it's not tied to a, you know, loyalty test to the state.
I would push back on a couple, not push back, add to a couple of things. I think that part of the beauty of the way that I get worried sometimes when we pour our outrage in the one person, like the president, generally. Because what that obscures so often is the apparatus and the tentacles of the apparatus of state violence that precede that person and will follow them. And specifically, I'm thinking about the ways in which we have allowed the CIA, the NSA, all of these apparati that have now bureaucrats that outlive the president to be able to have powers, as Stan points out, that now are unchecked upon them. So it almost, like, at some point doesn't even matter who's at the very top, because if you took that person away, those apparatus still exist along with the laws that undergird them. And so we're in a moment, though, I think, this instant where we've got folks who are doing state-sponsored violence against people, right? And this includes, obviously, the president who is overseeing all of this. But that is kind of the reason people are dulled to it, I feel, is because that has been couched in a way that is protection. Protection against the other.